So one of our beloveds, our sacred beloveds, lifted into her freedom form this week in her 20s. Her boyfriend was sharing with me that she talked about us, that she talked about unity and she talked about this space. And she said, it's different. It's personal. It's different. It's personal. This practice that is unity, this spiritual practice that teaches us beyond knowledge, beyond the mind, that we live in a spiritual world, that we are immersed in a field of wisdom, of love, of light. This is a teaching that is no doubt contagious, is it not? This is a teaching that no doubt emancipates people from the slavery of the mind or the slavery of the human condition or systems and into a greater possibility of who and whose they are. The master teacher, I love calling him the master teacher because that breaks the paradigms of what everyone thinks we're talking about. Deepak Chopra says that we talk about different Jesuses. Some Jesuses we talk about are Jesuses that didn't exist. They're the constructs of society, the constructs of control or religion. I'm talking about the master teacher. I'm talking about the one who walked in an enlightened and awakened state of truth and wisdom that gives an ever-present, always powerful, everywhere accessible message and knowing, because that man demonstrated and actualized a mind that is beyond the human mind and told everyone that mind is available to each of us. That's the master teacher I'm talking about. He's known as being the radical rabbi, and he's known as a controversial figure. I think he's known as a controversial figure because he had a walk that was contagious. He had a message that was radical. And he activated a force field, as Charles Fillmore talked about it when he was crucified and resurrected. He activated a force field, sending his very atoms into the ethers, the way that someone would run a race and break the world record and break it. And once that person broke it, everyone else knew it can be done. It can be done. And that presses something into the very atmosphere in which we live, where our minds that once in a moment had a limitation and thought, well, this is what we are, this is what I am as a human being, or this is what the potential or the possibility of life is. It's just this, it's small, it's framed in, it's boxed in, this is what it is. When one being, one soul breaks through that into the ethers, it's like a hallelujah chorus, it's like a choir singing, come with me, it can be done. And the master teacher demonstrated on so many levels that we are beyond our body, that we are not separate, that forgiveness is key, and that love is infinite. No? He was a man who activated a higher consciousness and had a radical vision of what is possible. Had a radical vision of what is possible. He was also a man that had such depth of compassion in his heart, such knowing of wholeness and beauty and wonder of the human soul on this continuum of evolution, of awakening, and of consciousness, that he is still remembered and talked about for that today. The Daily Word referred to Adam and the death of an Adam mind, and in Unity we talk about the Bible as being a metaphysical textbook from the carnal mind or the separate mind, the Adam consciousness, that mind that thinks we are limited, into the Christed consciousness, that mind that knows that we are one, that there is an infinite potential, that there is a divine space of union among us, that we can in fact take that journey, and that scripture is simply a guidebook, an experience book, pointing in the direction to lead us to that awakening, to lead us to that evolution. Eckhart Tolle said that he was one in whom the new consciousness fully emerged. That the master teacher was one in whom the full new consciousness emerged. Martin Luther King referred to some saying that Jesus was an impractical idealist who never quite came down to earth. And he says, and so the arguments abound, but far from being an impractical idealist, Jesus has become the practical realist. And the words of this text, he says, glitter in new eyes with new urgency, far from being the highest injunction of a utopian dreamer. He says this demand is an absolute necessity today for the survival of our civilization. Yes, it is all of that which will save our world and our civilization. Charles Fillmore in 1914 said these words, "The life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ is viewed and taught from two diametrically opposite standpoints. The first teaching, and the most popular, is that of the Orthodox Christian Church, that Jesus was the Son of God, that he was crucified and died, was resurrected, ascended into heaven, and sits at the right hand of the Father as one of the judges of men, and that his death was to save our souls. The other teaching is that of the unorthodox Christians, the mystics, those who see from the standpoint of logic and truth. They teach that Jesus was crucified, that he died, that life was put out of his body, but he had developed that power which resides in every man until he resurrected that body, that he refined that body until it was visible to the eye of sense, the spiritual eye, but that it resides here in our midst. That it is the seed of new life for all those who believe in it. That is, who enter into it with faith, striving to make their consciousness its consciousness." Now he says, those two great viewpoints of these teachings, succinctly stated, is this: one teaches men how to die, the other teaches men how to live. The master teacher became a living teaching. He is one who teaches healing through revelation, no? Healing through radical acceptance, radical love. Healing through revelation. He teaches peace through forgiveness and understanding, not retaliation. He teaches that you defeat a system not by harming an individual, but by loving so much you create a new paradigm. By loving so much, you create a magnet, and to that magnet, all good things come. Peace through forgiveness and understanding. He taught power, but power without authority, without money, without prestige, without force, and without war, and without dominance. He taught spiritual power, power through awakening, power through activation, power through love and through harmonizing and mental science. He was the Prince of Peace and a spiritual politician, no doubt, who challenged the existing paradigm and gave the invitation to usher in a new existence based on a new bottom line. He broke the human condition of ideas that we need to hoard, that we need to save up, that we can, in fact, in any way even become separate. And when we operate as if we are separate, we are just chasing roads of illusion. He taught that even in this life, even when we go beyond what our eyes can see, there is a most magnificent life awaiting. That it is no less, in fact, it is a great expression of the life that we are. That there is, yes, birth and death of the human form, but that life itself has no opposite. And when that went out like a tuning fork, when that message is received to all who have ears to hear and eyes to see, there is a new grounding, isn't there? Doesn't life take on a whole new meaning? Don't you become completely uninterested in building up the things of the flesh, of building up anything that would take away from another? And don't you begin to know and flow in and through and as this ever-giving generosity of life itself expressing? That is the spiritual transformation that happens when we awaken to the new foundation, the new reality, the new bottom line. He did this by reminding us of what is within us. Teaching, not as an authoritarian, not as a ruler, not as a king, but teaching as a brother about true worth, about our divine worth, about true equality and true wholeness. He demonstrated authority, and he didn't wait, did he, for anyone to give it to him? Not in the worldly realm. In fact, he took that authority from source, from spirit. And it was of no concern to him that other people thought that they had the right to contain and restrict that authority only to themselves. That type of human power didn't interest him. But he claimed his true birthright. And he claimed that as he listened to the source of his being, as he listened to the source of life, that it was his divine right, and not only his right, it was his calling and almost a demand that he go forth and teach and share from that spiritually given divine authority. He taught oneness, a most radically advanced concept of God. Radical in those days and radical in these days. Because when we take these teachings from the head to the heart, and oneness becomes our reality, we can never operate in a way that is of the world again. Everything shifts. It turns the very foundation on which we act, in which we think, and from which we generate. The master teacher tapped into something genuine and asked us to tap into something genuine for ourselves. Eric Butterworth, Unity author, referenced Jesus saying that Jesus did not place the emphasis on himself, he placed it on you. He placed the emphasis on you because he knew that if we placed the emphasis on him, we would be looking and looking and looking, and we would never stop to find what we were looking for. So he spoke of his own awakening, he spoke of his own knowing, but he always turned it back to the people. He urged people to find the wholeness within themselves and to discover that which is genuine within themselves. To trust that there was no other authority needed, no human, no worldly authority, that in fact, you and your source are one. I and my source are one. And that through a radically genuine and authentic spiritual practice that goes beyond religion and beyond time and space, one can awaken to all that is needed to unfold. Howard Thurman says, there is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have. It is the only true guide you will ever have. That's asking us to give up the rigid thinking, give up the linear thinking, give up the left brain concepts of a one-dimensional reality of the human condition, and to enter into the way, to become, in fact, the way. The master teacher taught us how to tap the field of mystical dimensions, the field of mental science, the field that embodies love, to come from an elevated, awakened consciousness. Some say that he did claim it for himself, that it was only him, that he is the one Son of God. and that he was sent, in fact, because humanity and human beings, individuals, are sinners that need to be saved. In fact, in consciousness, he taught that nothing needs to happen in order to be saved, that it has happened in a moment. He healed in a moment. He loved in a moment. He broke boundaries in a moment. He took away all of the human restrictions that said, my love, source love, God love, Christ consciousness is only available to you if you grew up in this time and space with this religion. It is only available for you to speak from this truth if you have gone through this education. It is only available to you to express that power if you were so-called ordained by the God of politics and government. And Jesus took all of that and wiped it away. And it is a radical idea because it brings forth a new consciousness and it brings up a divine responsibility that is outstanding and no doubt could bring us to our knees. The master teacher said, I am the way and the life. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. The master teacher was so in tune with the oneness, with the I am nature, that it was a deep grounded knowing that your I am nature is the only way. That the I am presence that speaks beyond rules and norms of human condition is the only truth. It's the only true voice, the one that can be trusted. That the I am nature is the life, not the physical form, not the body, but only through knowing the I am nature can one know their true life. And he demonstrated this life. Eckhart Tolle talks about this spiritual awakening when he says, when something emerges from within you that is deeper than who you thought you were. So the person is still there, but one could almost say that something more powerful shines through that person. He goes on to say, I am not my thoughts, emotions, sense perceptions, and experiences. I am not the content of my life. I am life. I am the space in which all things happen. I am consciousness. I am the now. I am. Let's take a minute to breathe that in together. I am not my thoughts. Will you say that with me? I am not my thoughts. Emotions. I am not my sense perceptions. I am not my experiences. I am not the content of my life. I am life. I am the space in which all things happen. I am consciousness. I am the now. I am. I was listening to something this week, and I wrote it down as a joke, but I don't think it was really meant to be a joke. But it was from a traditional Christian pastor. And he's been in the news a little bit lately, so you may have heard of him. But his name is Russell Moore. He's a Southern Baptist preacher and theologian. But he said this. He said, for too long, we've called unbelievers to invite Jesus into your life. He says, Jesus doesn't want to be in your life. Your life is a wreck. Jesus calls you into his life. I don't know, this week that worked for me. Like, what are you thinking about? Jesus doesn't want to be into your life. Your life is wrecked. Jesus doesn't want you to invite him into this world. Your world is a mess. He has something there. That should be how the altar call comes. He goes on to say, and this life that he has, and this life isn't boring or purposeless or static. It is wild and exhilarating and unpredictable, no doubt unpredictable. I believe that leads to the key of what the master teacher actually taught, which is that we don't come from a sense of separation, asking, please, Jesus, come into this life that is my lowly life. Please, God, come into the life that is the Christ mind. That in fact, we awaken when we step into the life of the Christ mind, which is the awakened mind, which has nothing to do, friends, with Christianity. It has to do with the idea of the absolute, that in the mind of our source, that in the mind of this universal presence, there is an idea of humanity. That is the idea of you and I here. And born within that great mind, that great source, was the power and the presence that is each one of us as individuals and collective. And that is the anointed, awakened consciousness. And it is available, it is whole, and it is holy, and it is our birthright. And we are called not to pine for it to come to us, but to know that the veil lifts the moment we decide to lift it, and we can step into it in fact. And that is the space and the place in which we have our being. I truly believe that science will someday discover these portals, that science will someday say, oh, this is what all religion was pointing to, or not all religion, let's say this is what the mystical of all religion was pointing to. This is what the master teachers of all spiritual traditions that got it were trying to communicate without having the context or the language or the science to describe. That we are selling ourselves short by not recognizing that there is a mind from which we can operate that is beyond limitations, beyond what we consider to be our limits here and now. How did Jesus heal? Jesus healed, I believe, because he never saw lack. I heard that once, that he healed because he never saw anyone as anything but perfectly whole. So like a tuning fork, that resonated. Have you ever had someone see you or presence you in such a way that they knew your absolute perfection, even in the midst of what you felt like was your absolute destruction, and there was a healing, there was a love, a transcendence of the moment, a transcendence of the suffering, an experience of peace? He taught that there was a portal in which we could experience everlasting life, that death, in fact, was not existence, that life has no opposite, and that he demonstrated that we have an energy body that can become even visible to the eye, but that we have an energy body that lives beyond time and form. And he showed that to the ones who could see. He showed that forgiveness is a portal to a higher dimension of freedom. That radical forgiveness is a portal to a higher dimension of freedom. And that error is simply an unconscious stage, an unconscious evolutionary stage or expression. But that we resurrect each other through forgiveness. That we resurrect our physical body through the knowing of our wholeness. That we resurrect ourselves through divine love. So the invitation is to step out of limitation, to become present moment awareness in which no boundaries and no separate sense of self exists. to rise into spaciousness. Eckhart Tolle said that he thinks if the master teacher was alive today, he may use different language to describe the kingdom of God. He said, I think if he lived nowadays, instead of kingdom, he would have said dimension. And heaven refers to a sense of vastness or spaciousness. So if we retranslate the words of Jesus into modern times, it would be the dimension of spaciousness is within you. The dimension of spaciousness is within you. It is everywhere present. It is always available, and it is never decreased when you use it. Marianne Williamson said that Jesus said we would someday do greater works than he. Should we not take him at his word? And should not someday be today? It is time for us to start working miracles if indeed we have the capacity within us to do so. Namaste.